There are specific signs that show up right before a manifestation arrives. The problem is that most people don't recognize them as signs because they don't feel like progress, they feel more like delays or like nothing is happening. But if even one of the 7 things I'm about to share is happening in your life right now, your manifestation is closer than you think. The first sign is the old version of you gets one last chance to speak. Have you ever noticed that right when you feel like you're making progress, life suddenly throws the exact same problem back in your face? Like you start working on your abundance and an unexpected expense shows up, or you start feeling better about yourself and someone you like rejects you, or you start believing things are finally changing and then something happens that makes you question all of it. Now, most people see that as proof that nothing is working, but what's actually going on is right before a real shift happens, the old version of you doesn't just disappear quietly, it shows up one more time, almost like asking, "Are you sure you're done being me?" And this is where people get confused, because when the old fears or doubts come up again, it feels like they're getting stronger, but that's not always true. Sometimes they're not getting stronger, they're just becoming more visible. To make this more concrete, I'll share something from my life. I'd been doing a lot of work around my beliefs around money, and I genuinely felt like something had shifted. I was calmer, I was more trusting, less reactive, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, 2 things happened. A payment I was expecting didn't come through, and a large unexpected business expense showed up on top of that. The moment it hit, I could feel the old version of me trying to take over and say things like, what if things aren't actually changing? Or what if I was just fooling myself? Or what if I'm right back where I started? And here's what I realized at that moment. The real test was not the expense. The real test was who I was going to be in response to that. Was I going to react from the old identity or the new one? Now, I didn't pretend the expense wasn't real. I just refused to build an old story around it. And funny enough, a few days later, my accountant calls me and he says, a new government policy has been introduced. The exact expense I thought I was going to have to pay ended up being reduced by about 75%. And looking back, the breakthrough wasn't the policy change. The breakthrough happened the moment I stopped reacting like the old version of myself. That's what this sign actually is. Not proof that nothing is working. It's the old pattern making one last appearance, waiting to see if you're still that person. And sometimes the most important thing you can do in that moment is just not go back. Now, the second sign is things go quiet before they move. One of the hardest parts of manifestation is not when things go wrong, because when things go wrong, at least you have something to react to and you know where you stand. What's much harder is when nothing seems to happen at all. Like you're doing the work, you're thinking differently, you're showing up differently, and then you just look around your life and it looks exactly the same. And that's usually when this doubt kicks in. Things like, is any of this actually working? Should I be doing something else? Should I be doing something different? Maybe it's not just meant for me. And I've been there. I feel like something had genuinely shifted inside of me, like I was more focused, more intentional. And because I felt different, I expected reality to start reflecting that almost immediately. But then a week goes by, then another, and nothing external is changing. Think about it like planting a seed. You plant it, you water it, you make sure it gets sunlight, and you do everything right. But imagine now that you dug it up every week to 10 days just to check whether it was growing. You just destroy the very thing you're trying to grow. But that's exactly what most of us do. We work for a while, and then we start checking for evidence. We start questioning the process, or we give it up altogether right before something is about to move. The quiet period isn't always a sign that nothing is happening. It's often just the space between planting and seeing. Now, most people mistake the absence of evidence for the absence of progress, and those aren't the same thing. The plateau isn't where most people fail, it's where most people stop. Now, the third sign is random looking events, they start connecting the dots. Most people, they expect like a manifestation will arrive in a straight line. Like you set an intention, you do the work, and the result appears. But that's rarely how it actually happens. Let's take the example of the Harry Potter movie. At the beginning, there are these little details that don't seem to matter at all. A strange scar on his forehead, a mysterious letter, a wand choosing Harry, and at that time they just felt like random moments. But as the story unfolds, you realize none of that was random. It was all a part of a much bigger picture that you just couldn't see yet. Life works the same way. The opportunity that changes everything, it rarely arrives looking important. Now, if you think about your own life, how many times has these things happened with you? I'll give you a few examples. Maybe things they usually show up as a conversation you almost didn't have, or an introduction that at that point of time seemed pointless. Or maybe you received a message and you nearly ignored it, but you replied back to it. Or you get a phone call you weren't expecting, or someone mentions your name to someone else for no obvious reason. You end up talking to a stranger and it shouldn't have gone anywhere, but it does. And this is you creating your reality, whether you realize it or not. I've actually proven that backed by science in another video. I will add the link in the description down below. It's worth checking after what we're discussing here. Now, at the time, the list of things I gave you, they just felt like a coincidence. But when you look back later, you realize that was the door. That's the bridge. That was the chain of small, seemingly unrelated events that ends up actually being the path from where you are to what you want. And most people miss it because they're looking for something that looks like their manifestation. So when it shows up like a casual conversation or a random introduction, they don't clock it. Your job is not to predict the bridge. Your job is to notice it when it appears. Now the fourth sign is you become hyper aware of the gap. This one is a bit strange because it feels like a step backwards, because the life you want suddenly feels further away than it did before. It's not closer, it's farther away. And that's confusing because you feel like you're growing. So why does this gap feel bigger? And I'll give you an example or a new way to look at it. Think about the first time you heard your own voice in a recording, or when you watched yourself on camera for the first time. Before that moment, you think you know how you sound, you think you know how you come across, and then you hear the playback and you suddenly notice everything. The words that you repeat, the nervous habits, the awkward pauses, things you never realized you were doing. Now, those things weren't actually created by the recording just showed you what was already there. And that's exactly what's happening when the gap suddenly feels more obvious. Nothing got worse, you're just finally seeing more clearly. Most people, they interpret that awareness as regression. They think, I used to feel better about this, now why does it feel worse? Now that it feels worse, I must be going backwards. But awareness is often the first real sign of change, because you can't shift what you can't see. The discomfort of seeing that gap clearly is not a setback, that's the beginning. Now the fifth sign is the small wins they start appearing that don't look important. When most people picture a manifestation arriving, they picture something dramatic, like it's either the relationship or the number in the bank account or the big opportunity or the final outcome. What they don't expect is it usually starts with something so small that it's easy to completely dismiss. Maybe it's a conversation that goes slightly better than expected, or a random idea that lands differently, or a piece of feedback you almost did not pay attention to. I'll give you an example from one of my favorite movies, Avengers Endgame. The final battle scene, the scene in which those big portals are opening up, that's not where it starts. It starts with one very small thing, which is Scott Lang, or popularly known as Ant-Man, coming back. That's it. One seemingly insignificant event. But if that doesn't happen, none of the rest happens. The entire ending of the movie, it starts with something that looked like nothing. A lot of the manifestations, they arrive the same way. People, however, are waiting for those portals. The universe often sends Ant-Man first. And because the early evidence doesn't look like what they imagined, they ignore it. They've already decided what the manifestation is supposed to look like. So when something smaller shows up, they don't count it. Now the sixth sign is the thing you're manifesting, it starts triggering you more. I mean, this one catches people off guard because the very thing you want, it starts making you more uncomfortable. Like you want more money and financial stress feels louder than before. You want a relationship and loneliness hits differently. You want more confidence and your insecurities feel impossible to ignore. And because of all of that, a lot of people assume they're moving in the wrong direction. I remember experiencing this clearly around money. In my mid-20s, I made my first 6 figures and I genuinely expected to feel secure after that. That confident, certain and calm. But that's not what happened. What surprised me was that once the money arrived, some uncomfortable thoughts around it also started surfacing. Part of me was wondering if I could do it again, and part of me felt like I didn't really deserve it. And underneath all of it, there was this quiet fear that eventually the money would all disappear. I could have taken that as a sign that something was wrong with me, but looking back, I see it differently. The money didn't create those fears, the money just revealed them. Those beliefs had already been sitting there the whole time. I just couldn't see them before because nothing was shining a light on them. And because they became visible, I could actually start working through them instead of just being unconsciously living from them. And years later, I found myself involved in negotiations and decisions worth millions of dollars for my own company. And I genuinely don't think I could have operated at that level if I had never confronted those earlier beliefs around worthiness and money. Discomfort wasn't a sign I was moving in the wrong direction. It was a sign that something hidden was finally coming into view. The thing you're manifesting is not creating the discomfort, it's exposing what was already underneath it. The desire is acting like a spotlight. So don't automatically interpret discomfort as a reason to stop. Sometimes discomfort is just awareness arriving before the change does. Now, the seventh sign is you start noticing things you never noticed before. Have you ever decided you wanted something and then suddenly started seeing it everywhere? Let's say you want a Range Rover, and then Range Rovers are just everywhere, every street, every car park, every traffic light. Now, they didn't suddenly multiply overnight, they were always there. Your brain just decided that they mattered. So now it's pulling them out of the background and putting them in front of you. This is what starts happening when you're genuinely moving towards something. You start noticing people living the kind of life you want. You start overhearing conversations that feel oddly relevant. Opportunities that were always around you start catching your eye. And things that used to blend in the background, they start standing out. The world hasn't necessarily changed, your filter has. And whether you call it alignment, focus, manifestation, or just a shift in awareness, it doesn't really matter what you call it. What matters is you're tuning into things that were previously invisible to you. Pay attention to what keeps catching your attention. The opportunities, the people, the ideas you're looking for. A lot of the time they've been around you the whole time. You're only now becoming able to see them. So these are the 7 signs, and they make more sense once you understand what's actually underneath them. Because once you do, you realize this was never just about the signs at all. It's about how you're creating your own reality all the time. I've explained that in another video. I'll add the link in the description down below and on the screen, and I'll see you there.